Oh, hello. Okay, the boy, chapter 1. The boy who lived. Mr. and Mrs. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4. The boy who lived. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4, Privet Drive. Of Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious because they didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnins, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her day of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley. And in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted. But they also had a secret. And their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter and Mrs. Dursley's sister. But they haven't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as undurlishly as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys knew what the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want Dudley mixing with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke up on the dull, grey Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloud sky outside to suggest that the strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work. And Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as he wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large 20-hour flutter past window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on corner on the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stepped back, and Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road. He watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. Looking at the Let's put that there. Okay. Looking at the sign, cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get that day. But on the edge of town, Jules was driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help notice that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about, people in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw on young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why? That man had to be older than he was, and he was wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings parking lot, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window in his office on the ninth floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the hours swooping past in broad daylight, though people down the street did. They pointed and gazed open mouthed as hour after hour sped overhead. Most of them had never seen an owl even at night time. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal, owl-free morning. He yelled at five different people. He made several important telephone calls and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he had stretched his legs and walked across the road. He forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the bakers. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him angry. They made him uneasy. This bunch were whispering excitedly too, and he couldn't see a single cloak collecting tin. It was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag. Then he caught a few words of what they were saying. The porters. That's right. That's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whispers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed back across the road, hurried up to his office, snapped at the secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and he had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache. Thinking, no, he was being stupid. Potter wasn't such a unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son called Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his nephew was called Harry. He never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There was no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got so upset at any mention of her
This sounds like a line from the beginning of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. In the first chapter, Mr. Dursley is noticing some strange things happening in the world around him, and he's trying to rationalize them so he doesn't have to worry his wife, Petunia. She gets very upset at any mention of her sister, Lily Potter, who was a witch. Do you want to talk more about this part of the book, or something else
shop.
related to Harry Potter?
He didn't blame her if he had a sister like that, but all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills that afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone just outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as a tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem at all upset at being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice that made passersby stare, don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggers like yourself should be celebrating this happy day. And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted to the spot. He had hugged by he had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought he had been called a mugger. Whatever that was, he was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off for home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was a tabby cat he had spotted that morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. It was sure it's the same one. He had the same marking around his eyes. Shoo, said Mr. Dursley loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention anything to his wife. Mr. Dursley had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. next door's problem with her daughter and how Dudley had learned a new word, wound. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went to the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, bird watchers everywhere. Have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping pattern. The newscaster allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious, and now over to Jim McGriffin with the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman. I don't know about that. But it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me instead of of the rain I promised yesterday, they had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain. Owls flying by daylight. Mysterious people in cloaks all over the place. And a whisper about the porters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He had to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Miss Petuna, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As she had expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. No, she said suddenly. Why? Funny stuff on the news, Mr. Dursley murmured. Owls, shooting stars, and there were a lot of funny people in town today. So? Snapped Mrs. Dursley. Well, I thought maybe it was something to do with, her crowd. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he dared tell her he heard the same name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Was he imagining things? Could all this have anything to do with the Potters? If it did, if it did, it got out, and they were related to a pair of he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason to come near him or Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how he and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. Dot, 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 dot. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no sign of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as the wall outside. It was sitting as still as a statue. Its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as quiver when a car door slammed on the next street, nor when 2 hours swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner. Appeared so suddenly you have thought he just popped out from the ground. The cat's tail twitched and his eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, old, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept the ground, a high-heeled, buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize he had just arrived in the street, where everything from his names to his boots were unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something. But he did seem to realize he was being watched, because he looked up stunnedly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and murmured, "I should have known." He found what he was looking for in his inside pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open. Held it up in there and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put of the until the only lights left in the whole street were two tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall. He turned to smile at the tabby, but it was gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe looking woman who was wearing a square glasses, exactly the shape of the markings the cat had around his eyes. She too was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. How do you know it was me? She asked. My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly. You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day, said Professor McGonagall. All day? When you could have been celebrating. I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way here. Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. Oh, yes, everyone's celebrating. All right, she said impatiently. You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no. Even the muggles have noticed something going on. It was on their news. She jerked her head back at the dusty, dark living room window. I heard it, flocks of owls, shooting stars. But they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something shooting stars down in Kent. I bet that was Douglas Diggle. He never had much sense. You can't blame them, said Dumbledore gently. We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. I know that, said Professor McGonagall irritably. But there's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless. But on the street, in broad daylight, not even dressed in muggle clothes, swapping rumors. She threw a sharp, sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't. So she went on. A fine thing it would be if, on the very day you know who seems to have disappeared at last, the muggles who found it brought us all. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore. It certainly seems so, said Dumbledore. We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon drop? A what? A lemon drop. They're kind of muggle sweet I'm rather fond of. No, thank you, said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think it was a moment for lemon drops. As I say, even if you know what has gone, who has gone, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this, you know who, nonsense. For 11 years, I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking to 2 lemon drops, seemed not to notice. It all gets so confusing if you keep saying you know who. I've never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding that exasperated, half admiring, But you're different. Everybody knows you're the only one you know. Oh, alright, Voldemort has frightened off. Voldemort was frightened off. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort has powers I will never have. Only because you're too well noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Professor told me she liked my new year mask. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, the owls are nothing next to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying about why he disappeared, about what finally stopped him? It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason should be waiting on the cold hard wall all day, for neither as cat nor as woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain, and whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another lemon drop and did not answer. What they are saying that he pressed on is that last night Voldemort turned into Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter they're dead. That they're dead. Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James, I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Oh, Albus. Dumbledore reached down and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry. But he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's powers somehow broke. And that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's true, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just astounding. Of all things to stop him. It's true. It's just astounding. Of all things to stop him, how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around in his pocket and said, Luggage late. suppose you assume. Who told you I'll be here, by the way? Yes, said Professor McGonagall. And I don't suppose you're getting to tell me why you're here of all places. I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They are the only family he has now. You don't mean you can't meet the people who live here? Cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet and pointing at number 4. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching the body. Can't find the people who are left here. And then they got his son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way out the street, screaming for sweet. Harry Potter, come and live here. It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore's family. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter. A letter, repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore, you think you can explain all this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today he was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There'll be books written by Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very serious over the top of his half-moon glasses. It'll be enough to turn anybody's head. Famous before he can walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'll be, growing up away from all until he's ready to take it? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed, and then said, Yes, you're right, of course. But how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly, as though she thought he might be hiding Harry underneath it. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly. But you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to. What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as he looked up and down the street for some sign of headlight. It swelled to a roar as they both looked up in the sky. And a huge motorcycle fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. The motorcycle was huge. There was nothing to the man sitting astride it. He was almost twice as tall as a normal human and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so while long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face, he had hands the size of trash can lids, and his feet in leather boots were like baby dolphins. In his vast muscular arms he was holding a bundle of blankets. Hagrid, he said. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. At last, and where do you get that motorcycle? Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore. Sir, said the giant, climbing carefully off the motorcycle as he spoke. Young Sirius Black lent it to me. I've got him, sir. No problem. Where Where they? No problems, were they? No, sir. House was almost destroyed. But I got him all right before the muggers started swarming around. He fell asleep as we were flying over the Bristol. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was a baby boy, fast asleep, under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead. Could see a curiously shaped cut, like a bolt of lightning. Is that where? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Yes, said Dumbledore. You have that scar forever. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in handy. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned towards the Dursley house. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Hagrid. He bent his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him. Patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over. Okay, everyone. We're going to take a break for a while. A short while. Yes, yes, it's all very sad. But get a grip on yourself, Hajit. Oh, we found, Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hajit gently on the arm. As Dumbledore as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took a letter out from his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the three of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Patrick's shoulders shook. Well, said Dumbledore finally. Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeves, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorcycle and kicked the engine to life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Oops. Good luck, Harry. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took out the silver put of altar. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back to their street lamps so that Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange, and he could make a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets on the step of number 4. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. He turned on his heel and with a swish of his coat, he was gone. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. He turned on his heel and as soon as the cloak, he was gone. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky. The very last where was baked and being astonishing things happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him and he slept on. Not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't knew that all this at this very moment. People meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and singing in hushed voices, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." Chapter 2, with the Vanishing Glass. Nearly 10 years had passed since the Dursleys had woken up to find their nephew on the doorstep, on the front step. But Privet Drive had hardly changed at all. The sun rose on the same tidy front gardens and lit up the bronze number 4 on the dirty front door. It crept into their living room, which was exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen that fateful newspaper about hours. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. 10 years ago, there had been lots of pictures of what looked like a large pink beach ball wearing different colored bonnets. But Dudley Dursley was no longer a baby. Another photograph showed a large blond boy riding his first bicycle on a carousel at the fair, playing a computer game with his father, being hugged and kissed by his mother. The room had held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. Yet Harry Potter was still there, asleep at the moment, but not for long. His Aunt Petunia was awake, and it was her shrill voice that made the first noise of the day. "Up, get up now." Harry woke with a start. His aunt rapped on the door again. "Up," she screeched. Harry heard her walking toward the kitchen, and then the sound of a frying pan being put on the stove. He rolled onto his back and tried to remember the dream he had been having. It had been a good one. There had been a flying motorcycle in it. He had a funny feeling he had the same dream before. His aunt was back outside the door. "Are you up yet?" she demanded. "Nearly," said Harry. "Well, get a move on. I want you to look after the bacon, and don't you dare let it burn. I want everything perfect on Daddy's birthday." Harry groaned. His aunt snapped through the door. Or get a move on. Harry groaned. What do you say? His aunt snapped the door. Nothing, nothing. Dudley's birthday. How could have how could he have forgotten? Harry got up slowly out of bed and started looking for socks. He found a pair under his bed. And after pulling a spider on one of them, put them on. Harry was used to the spiders. Because the cupboard under the stairs was full of them, and that was where he slept. When he was dressed, he went down the hall into the kitchen. The table was almost hidden beneath all Dudley's birthday presents. It looked as though Dudley had gotten the new computer he wanted, not to mention the second television and the racing bike. Exactly why Dudley wanted a racing bike was a mystery to Harry, as, as Dudley was a very fat and hated exercise. Dudley was very fat and hated. Unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. Dudley's favorite punching bag was Harry, but he could not often catch him. Harry didn't look it, but he was very fast. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard. But Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. He looked even smaller and skinnier than he really was. Because all he had to wear were old clothes of Dudley's. And Dudley was about 4 times bigger than he was. Harry had a thin face, no knees, black hair, blonde hair, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of scotch tape because all the times Dudley had punched him in the nose. He had had he had had it as long as he could remember. And the first question he could ever remember asking his Aunt Petunia was how he had gotten it. In the car crash when your parents died, she had said, and don't ask questions. Don't ask questions, that was the first rule for a quiet life with the Dursleys. Uncle Vermont entered the kitchen as Harry was turning over the chicken. Comb your hair, he barked, by the way of a morning greeting. And once a week, Uncle Vermont looked over the top of his newspaper and shouted that Harry needed a haircut. Harry must have had more haircuts than the rest of the boys in the class put together. But it made no difference. His hair simply grew that way, all over the place. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small, watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on his thick, fat head. Eh? What the sh... Harry put the plates of eggs and bacon on the table. Harry was frying eggs soon. Harry was frying eggs by the time Dudley arrived in the kitchen with his mother. Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large pink face, not much neck, small watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on his thick fat head. Aunt Petuta often said that Dudley looked like a baby angel. Harry often said that Dudley looked like a pig in a wig. Harry put the plates of eggs and bacon on the table, which was difficult as there wasn't much room. Dudley, meanwhile, was counting his presents. His face fell. 36, he said, looking up at his mother and father. That's 2 less than last year. 37 then, said Dudley, going red in the face. Hello, if art so much. How are you doing today? Silly Fia. I'm so scared for English PSLE. Oh, how come, man? Do you have a certain section on the paper that maybe you're unsure of? Cha. You need English help? What help do you need? You need any like tips or certain section of the paper you need help? You also say my name like teacher Mitsuko. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I learned from her, you know. I learned from teacher Mitsuko. That's why. The complete close ah. I think for complete close, there's a lot of practice. Because a lot of the words they use, right, they actually give the options, right, actually quite repetitive. Like they use the same options over and over again. So once you like kind of like mastered these few words that they always like to give you for complete close, right, I think it should be okay. Yeah, because they really like to repeat what they already tested the past few years. So generally it's kind of like copy paste. I need help with grammar MCQs. Okay, grammar MCQs well, grammar MCQs, that one also a lot of practice. That one is really, it's just like complete close like that. Like how they always like to repeat a lot certain words, certain grammar questions. The question itself will change, but the options generally are about the same. Yeah, so that one I think both really need just a lot of practice lah, to be honest. Or another way you can learn, right, is that you watch teachers doing the paper. Wait, are you from KCPPF? Or maybe you guys know each other. Could you always be my boo? Okay, anyways, that's all for the live today. Chief. Anyways, that's all for the live today. I'll catch you guys, should be tomorrow or another day. Later should have live also lah, so you can tune in. That one is real paper teaching. Yeah, okay. Thank you guys for watching. Bye bye.